Well, here we are. This is a new experiment, and I already see we have a certain number of people here. My name is Rudy Maxa, and if you've never heard of me, I'm a travel journalist, and I do a weekend radio show called RM World Travel with my host Robert and Mary Carey. And I love doing it. And we interview about 8 to 9 guests a week on that every weekend for about 2 hours. But as a journalist, I've always liked longer form questions. So along with my partner Tommy Danielson, came up with this idea of doing a longer format where I can actually talk to somebody for, say, 20 whole minutes. So this is it. This is the beginning of something called I Was Thinking by me, and I'm going to try to think, but I'm also going to let our guests think and talk too. I'm going to start every show with a look at a particular wine and talk about that region, just to put a little travel into it and have a little fun. So I brought a Spanish wine. This was a very heavy bottle. It's one of these heavy leaded bottles. It's called Brega, and it's from the western part of Spain, from a very small winery, although it's not hard to get this. It's about $35 a bottle. I have some notes on it. Let me take a look at it. This is wine from a region called Catalayud, and it's began as a Roman settlement back in about 45 AD. The thing about this wine is they don't make much of it. It's grown with no chemicals, which is sort of a growing thing in wine. As I said, about $35. It's 16% alcohol, which is pretty heavy for wine. And it's got ratings in the 90s from everybody, from James Suckling to the Wine Enthusiast to so on. Here, I always love it when they tell it what it tastes like, because I can never do that. The critics have said it has a taste of blackcurrant, blackberry, dust, and leather. I guess that's good, dust and leather. On the nose, it's very rich on the nose. They say vanilla toast, smoked tobacco, dark fruit, and red fruit. I'd say tobacco and red fruit. Anyway, this region of Spain is very hilly. It's a small vineyard. They make very little wine. They cellar for about 22 months in new and older oak before they release it on the market. This is a 2015. I'll show you the bottle again. It's spelled Brega, Brega. This heavy bottle. They put the lead in these bottles, and it's a very big deal. I'll taste it. I haven't tasted this. A friend gave this to me, and God, that is huge. It's grown in very rocky soil. You'll find that in mountains a lot, or side of mountains. And all the grapes are harvested on the side of mountain. That is an enormous wine. So you want to eat something big, like if you're into meat, roast beef or steak, or a rich pasta, something that a big wine won't overwhelm. At any rate, that's the wine of the week. I'm going to try to do a different wine from a different region each time. I'll do a New Zealand wine, talk a little about that. I've not been to this vineyard. Many of the wines I'll talk about, I will have been to the vineyard, or at least to the region or the country. And so we'll get serious about then. I've got two guests coming up. The first one is a gentleman whose name is, let me tell you what he is. He is the head of communications for Norwegian Air. Norwegian Air, of course, has really shaken up the transatlantic business for Americans by trying to start. Many others have started and failed, but they have tried to start and so far succeeded in low-cost fares across the Atlantic to Europe. But with the current coronavirus situation, obviously airfares to Europe, air flights to Europe have stopped. And Norwegian Air, I don't know, about a week and a half ago, had to lay off about 90% of its staff. But just this week, the Norwegian government offered a lifeline in terms of millions of dollars. And we're going to talk with my guest, whose name is, I have to pronounce I'm going to pronounce it the English way. This is not the way he pronounces. His last name is Lindström. So we're going to invite Mr. Lindström into the room in just a moment. I know him. I've worked with Mr. Lindström. His first name is, we pronounce it Anders, Anders. I'll let him pronounce it. He's actually Swedish. He says it's just like Norwegian Airlines, just like Norway, except richer when he talks about Sweden. He should pop up on the screen at any moment, and I'll bring him in on the conversation. I asked him to come in at 7 minutes after the hour. It's now 6 minutes after the hour. The hope with this, and the hope when we talked about doing longer form interviews, that I would be in some exotic place, in a by the port in Portofino, or in a cafe in I don't know, Monte Carlo, you name it, Hong Kong, Bangkok, any place other than my living room, which is where I am now. But I've been watching the news, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, and they're doing all their interviews on Skype now. and some have very plain white backgrounds. I did the best I could with some books in the background and a model of an airplane up there. And on the bottom of the screen, you'll see a thing called Open Questions, and you're allowed to ask questions. I've got a couple, which I will bring. Mike asked, should anyone travel today for any reason? I mean, there are reasons to travel. I can tell you that the Tuesday of this week, an average of 2.2 million Americans normally fly. This Tuesday of last year, 2.2 million Americans flew on airplanes. On this Tuesday, it's about 230,000. Excuse me, 230,000. Yeah, it seems like a lot of people, but compared to 2.2 million, it's just a little over 10%. So people have reasons to fly. It may be crucial business, it may be a death in the family, it may be a long planned wedding. So yeah, there are reasons to fly, but if you can avoid flying and don't do it, well, I suggest it. And here's our guest. Let me see if I can figure out how to do this. This is our first show ever. And there he is. This is Anders Lindström. Anders, welcome to the show. Nice to have you here.
Thank you very much. And I'm honored to be your first guest.
All right. You are reverberating with me. I don't know if it's a microphone, but we'll learn this together. Anders, oh, and by the way, I mentioned we have two guests coming up. At the half hour, I'll join my friend Dan Buettner, who is the founder of the Blue Zones. You can look up bluezones.com if you don't know him. And we're going to talk about blue zoning your life in the era of quarantines. Anders, I want to bring in because, as I said, Anders, I told those of us who are in the room, or the guests who are in the room now, that Norwegian really did revolutionize transatlantic travel for Americans by bringing down fares and kept airfares down on the major airlines, who pretty much had a lock on the fares. I mean, British Airways, American, United, they all charged, and Virgin, they all charged about the same, and along came Norwegian. I did mention that a couple of weeks ago, the company had to temporarily lay off 90% of its workers, but that you had a financial lifeline thrown to you from the Norwegian government this week. And I also told them you're Swedish, not Norwegian. But
I heard that, and I appreciate the pronunciation of my name. Thank you.
Well, I'm giving give us the Swedish pronunciation of Anders.
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 You have to sound happy when you speak any Scandinavian language.
All right, it's spelled Anders, so an American reading would read as Anders. And I asked Anders how we'd like to be referred to, and he said, "I'm in America." You're based in, where are you based, Anders?
I'm based in New York, in Hell's Kitchen.
Right. So in Hell's Kitchen.
So that's where we have our U.S. office.
Okay, let's talk about Norwegian Air. This financial lifeline, that I call it a financial lifeline. How many millions of dollars was it?
So it's three different trenches. So it's three parts. And the Norwegian government was very quick on identifying the need for the aviation industry. So it's 6 billion Norwegian crowns for the aviation industry in total, of which half is set aside to Norwegian. But it's a credit loan or credit guarantee. So 2 days ago, we got the first round of the liquidity, which is 300 million Norwegian crowns.
Now, what will that allow you to? How much is that in dollars, and what will that allow you to do?
So that's about $27 million. So that's obviously helping with this day we're in now. And then the finance team is working on the next two rounds for 1.2 billion Norwegian crowns, and the last one is for 1.5 billion Norwegian crowns, and that's excuse me, for the end of June. So obviously now, as you mentioned, we've unfortunately been forced to temporarily lay off 90% of our staff or employees around the world. We have reduced capacity almost to the minimal. We normally have 165 or so aircraft in the air, and we're operating less than a dozen of that at the moment. We're only operating a few rescue flights out of Scandinavia and some flights within Scandinavia. So it's a very different setting to what we usually do. I mean, just from the US, we have 40 routes normally nonstop from the US to Europe, and at the moment we have 0. So that money is going to help us, obviously.
What will this allow you to do? Will this just allow you to keep the lights on and the lawyers working?
Well, I mean, obviously that as well, but just working with the contingency plans for until we get the next plan. And obviously we're working against or towards when we know we can resume service, obviously when the travel bans are lifted and when demand will come. And that's kind of what we're looking at right now. How quickly can we get back everything into normal operations that we're used to?
Well, that's a question that everybody is asking everybody all the time, from the president of the United States to the guy on the street. How can you even think about that, not knowing what the arc of this virus is going to be, or what do the people who are thinking about it say right now?
Yeah,
are they thinking maybe late summer we'll be flying again?
That's the $1 million question, or even more so. So what we have, as I'm sure every airline in the world right now, that you have different scenarios of what's going to happen once the travel bans are lifted. But also once they're lifted, it's all about demand coming back as well. That's going to take a while to build up as well. So obviously, no airline is going to put back normal capacity because it's not going to be that big of a demand in the beginning, but slowly growing again.
So they're not even saying late summer or early fall or next month or Easter. I'm sure it's not Easter.
That's what Trump's saying. We don't want to give out anything until, obviously, we don't want to mislead anyone. So we're following all the data we get and look at different scenarios and try to be quick to act on those once we know the details.
Now, I know from talking to you that the first 15 years of Norwegian Air, the airline was quite profitable. Starting up, you have so many routes, into North America, that was our next guest, Buettner. Now, Dan, you're not supposed to join us till half after the hour, but nice to have you here. Dan, hi, Dan. Let me
Am I early?
Yeah, you're really early, Dan. You're not due until half the hour.
This is just kind of a teaser. I just figured I'd come in and say hello to everybody and tell you're in for a real treat when I come back.
Thank you, Dan, very much.
So long.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. As I said when we started this webcast, we're all learning here, and I guess so is Dan. If any guest dials in early, they automatically appear on the screen. We don't have a holding pen for them. So, Anders, I was saying that the Norwegian Air was traditionally profitable. You started very ambitiously in North America. As you said, you had 40 stations in North America?
No, so 40 routes from the US, excuse me. So we operate from 12 airports. But you also have to remember, we only launched service to and from the US back in 2013. So in America, we're one of the newest airlines operating here and grew very, very fast because we realized America was such a key market. And as of last year, America is actually our biggest market in terms of revenue. So this is where we've seen the most growth. We've added a lot of capacity, a lot of routes, new cities. We also have 3 crew bases here in the US. So we actually have more US-based cabin crew than any other foreign airline. We have a crew base in JFK, one in Fort Lauderdale, and one in Los Angeles. And so we fly from 12 airports in the US nonstop to 8 in Europe.
And you said to me that you've not been profitable because of North America for a while, but that this summer was shaping up to be brilliant, and you hope next summer will.
Yeah. So I mean, for any airline, summer is the peak season. So we were looking forward to a really good summer. We've announced earlier this year that we were looking to return to profitability for 2020. So things were looking really positive. I'm very jealous. You're drinking wine. I only have water here.
I know. I should have told you. I open each show. Each show is my first show. We open.
I'm learning this now.
Different region and talk about it. But let me ask you. Are you mentioned how many people will come back to flying? I think that once there's a return to normalcy and flights are flying regularly, there's going to be a huge amount of pent-up demand. Don't you feel that? Do you think there's actually going to be a lag time between people before people really want to get out and get on a plane and go somewhere again?
There's twofold. There's some people who are obviously going to be scared because of everything they read in the media, but there's also going to be a lot of people, once it's safe to travel, as in we know the coronavirus, the spread is under control, people really want to start traveling again because they've been, pretty much locked up in their apartments or houses for a very long time. And I also hear very positively from both colleagues and other people saying, once everything is back to normal or somewhat normal, they want to start travel, and they really want to go to Italy once it's safe and support the economy, and France and all these affected countries, Spain, for instance.
Eliza asks a question here. She is coming in from France, of all places. Do you think there will be changes in aircraft when you start? In other words, will you be flying flying smaller planes in order to maybe meet the immediate demand, but not the eventual demand?
I'm sure that's part of one of the scenarios they're looking at. But for transatlantic routes, we operate the Dreamliner, which is working really well. And we have one of the, if not the highest load factor in the world, especially on long-haul routes, usually around 92%. So for us, those planes work perfectly.
It's interesting. I should say to viewers that when Andrew starts, sometimes there's a reverb, and then as he talks, it ends. We'll see. We're actually changing software for next week, so we'll see if it's a little better and the sound quality isn't. Sound quality is fine, Anders, but when you start talking, sometimes it reverbs a little. I don't know if that's what people are hearing, but that's what I'm hearing. Okay, let me see what other questions we have from folks here. Well, no, nothing. This is a question for Dan coming up. I'll wait for him. So do you have any commercial flights flying now within Europe? You said you have some planes still in the air.
Within Scandinavia and also domestic Norway. Norway, I think, is the second biggest domestic market in the world. So it's a very long, stretched out country, very mountainous. So they're very dependent on aviation, which I also believe is one of the reasons why the Norwegian government was so quick to act on this, because they know how important it is, not only for people, but also moving goods around. So that's where we're operating. I'm also working with the Swedish and Norwegian governments for some rescue flights.
What is the coronavirus situation in Norway?
It was hit pretty bad because a lot of Scandinavians go to northern Italy for skiing. So that's how they believe it moved very quickly to Scandinavia.
I'm sorry to hear that. You're still working, obviously. Where do you park these planes when they can't be in the air? Where do you park them? We have deserts here in the United States where we park unused aircraft in California, and I think New Mexico is another one of them, or Arizona for sure. Yep. Where do you park all that metal?
A lot of them are in Norway. So even the Dreamliners, even if they don't necessarily operate to Norway, they actually flown to Norway and put in different airports there to keep them safe at the moment.
How many aircraft do you have? How many Dreamliners do you have?
Dreamliners around 40, 165, 166 aircraft in total. So it's a big fleet.
Is there any other fleet that has any other airline that has that many of the wide-body Dreamliners, Boeing Dreamliners?
I know we have one of the most, because our entire long-haul fleet is the Dreamliner. So we also have one of the most fuel-efficient and modern fleets in the world. It's around 3.8 years. That's the average fleet, which is much, much lower than if you look at any of the American carriers or most other carriers as well. So and that is also, sorry?
No, I was just going to say, I presume when you start service, you will start back to North America promptly to at least most of your markets, yes?
Yes, absolutely. That's what we're looking forward to, because we know here that the America is one of our strongest markets, and the demand will come back, absolutely.
Do you think airlines are going to have to offer fairly large discounts to get people back on planes?
Probably, but that's where we're one step ahead. So as a low-cost airline, that's what it comes down to: low cost and operating cost. People sometimes get confused what low cost means, and hopefully when they come on board, they realize it's not a budget experience in any way. We've actually won more awards than any other low-cost airline in the world. It's a highly competitive and great economy product or premium in the front. So we already offer really competitive fares. So for us, it's going to be easier returning to those fares, where it's going to be tougher for some of the legacy carriers trying to compete with that.
So it sounds like you prefer to call Norwegian a low-cost airline as opposed to a discount one. You know, you used to work at JetBlue as an executive. I know that. And when JetBlue entered certain markets in the United States, it had the same effect Southwest had for years. It was called the Southwest factor, because as soon as Southwest entered a market, they came in with very low fares, and their competitors had to drop their fares. Do you expect to still be a low-cost carrier for transatlantic flights after these times when you're not making any money?
Well, absolutely. So we see our transatlantic routes have been doing really well, and that's what we've been focusing. As I said before, America is our biggest revenue market, and that is because the demand and so much strong demand for a long haul. And as you mentioned before, I think the 80% or more than 80% of all transatlantic routes are still operated by joint ventures or alliances or partner airlines, which is why the fares have been so high. So it's up to Norwegian and a few other airlines to come in and compete and bring the fares down, as we've seen. And the average fares have come down considerably since.
Well, for some folks in the room who are watching, you might not know that Norwegian doesn't just fly to Norway from all these American destinations. No. Can you disabuse us of that notion?
So, absolutely, and thank you for asking that, because we do have a bit of a confusing name, and we're also not part of Norwegian Cruise Line. We have no affiliation with Norwegian Cruise Line at all. But Norwegian is actually Norwegian, obviously, and that's how it started as a small domestic carrier, but then grew to a Scandinavian carrier, then European carrier, then also launching long haul and transatlantic to the US. Our biggest base from the US is actually London. So we have 11 routes to London from the US, followed by Paris, Barcelona, Rome, Amsterdam, Athens. So and of course, Oslo as well, Norway. But the clear majority of our routes are to continental Europe.
And did you notice the competition, particularly into London, which is an expensive airport? Heathrow is an expensive airport to fly into. Did you notice the Virgin Atlantics and the Uniteds, Americans, and British Airways of the world shaving their fares to meet the competition that Norwegian brought to the table?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we actually fly into London Gatwick, which is a great airport and lower cost than Heathrow.
Right, yeah. I'm sorry.
And we're the third largest airline. That's right.
Go ahead.
We're actually the third largest airline at London Gatwick. And again, that's something a position we obtained just after a few years of operation. So London is a really great destination. I think it's more the airlines you mentioned finding us a threat than the other way around. And yes, we've absolutely seen them bring their prices down as well to compete.
Michael asks, what airline alliance is Norwegian Air associated with?
We're not part of any of the alliances, which is another reason why the fares are lower. We announced late last year that we will commence a partnership with JetBlue, which we are still to announce the final details with that. It was meant to launch this summer. Obviously now with the coronavirus, everything's been put on hold, but that's something we're very excited to launch. So it would mean that anyone who booked on either JetBlue.com or Norwegian.com could buy a through ticket from a JetBlue destination connecting with a Norwegian destination, a long haul out of Boston, New York, and Fort Lauderdale.
Let me repeat that for folks because you're reverberating again, and for folks who might not have understood, you were about this summer to launch an alliance of sorts with JetBlue, so that someone booking a ticket on JetBlue to get to one of your gateways, the luggage would be seamless, et cetera, et cetera. Did you mention a second line, or was it just JetBlue?
JetBlue, it's a partnership. No, I wouldn't call it an alliance, but we also have something similar with EasyJet in Europe since about 2 years ago. But this is a stronger partnership.
We only have a couple minutes left with you before we bring in Dan Buettner, but Cheryl wants to know, and this is a tough question for you to answer, I think, but what do you expect the ticket price to be once you are back flying?
We expect them to be fairly similar to what they are now. I mean, with Norwegian, if you go on the website, you can get the lowest fares from nonstop from New York, for instance, to London or Europe for $130, $140 in economy, including taxes, because we're European airlines. We always have taxes and charges included. Or if you're flying in premium, it's you can get them for $600 one way.
And compare that for someone who doesn't fly to London a lot with flying on another airline.
So I would say that our premium fare around $600 is comparable to what some of them charge, even just in economy. So it's highly competitive, and you still have just as good, if not even better, a product with us.
I will say your premium class, they are not lie flat beds, which some of the competition offers, but they can easily charge. They usually do charge $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 round trip for that lie flat bed. You have a seat that goes back further than the coach seats, quite comfortably. And you're saying $1,200 round trip, basically New York to London, is not unheard of and could be expected probably.
Oh yeah, and we also know, I mean, yes, you compare them to lie flat, which there is a market for that, but there's also a massive market for somewhere in between. And our premium is positioned somewhere between our competitors' premium economy and business class. So you get a lot of the frills, but a completely different price and a more affordable price.
What percentage of your passengers are business travelers, and what percentage are leisure travelers?
So we don't have exact numbers, but we do notice the amount of corporate customers or business travelers has been increasing a lot, especially with the premium product. But also, we see a lot of smaller businesses or entrepreneurs who don't have massive travel budgets. They travel smarter and choose more affordable fares, so they can travel more often instead.
Terrific. And do you have a frequent flyer program, a loyalty program?
Of course. Yes, Norwegian Reward. And we actually launched our very first credit card here in the US last fall in October. So we actually have more than 1 million members in the US already. So now we're growing on that and adding the credit card so people can earn cash points quickly. Then they can convert to free flights to Europe by just spending what they usually spend.
Terrific. Cheryl, who asked one of the questions, just wrote, she said she's used Prime several times on your airline. Reasonable and a very good value. What is Prime?
Does she mean Amazon Prime or sorry?
I don't know what she means. I don't know if she meant Premier, maybe. She said she's used Prime several times on your airline. Reasonable and a very good value. I thought maybe that was a classic I'd never heard of.
Sorry.
Premium, perhaps.
She probably meant premium. That would make more sense. And I'm happy she's enjoying it. It is a great product. I mean, I'm 6'4". I'm a tall Scandinavian, but even when I'm in that seat, I can stretch my legs and not necessarily hit the seat in front of me. So it's a lot of legroom, a lot of private space for you as well.
All right. Could be the last question here from Eliza asking does Norwegian have a credit card in Europe?
Oh yeah, in Scandinavia we do. So it's one of the most popular credit cards in the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark.
Can you get it in other Europe? Can you apply for it in France or England?
Not yet, but as the company continues to grow, of course, we're looking into all those opportunities as well. And I'll let the rewards team know that there is demand for it.
Thank you. Anders is Lindström is the head of communications for Norwegian Air. Delighted to have you the first guest. Thank you for coming along with me and allowing Dan to sort of horn in. We'll have him on in about 4 or 5 minutes. But Anders, take the rest of the day off, and thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And I wish Norwegian good luck at getting back into the air. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Now let's see. I don't know if Anders has to sign off or I have to do something. I don't know what to do here. Anders, I think you have to sign out. We'll see about that. We promised you a travel tip of the week, and I had this in my newsletter last week. You may have probably, like many folks, spent a good amount of time in the last couple of weeks canceling flights you had coming up, and either getting credit on the airline for a future flight, or in very rare cases, an actual cash refund. I know I had several to cancel, and I spent anywhere from, I don't know, well, in one case it was 5 hours. I didn't spend that long in line, but I called Delta to cancel a flight, and I got a recording saying, you're in line. We're going to hold your place in line, but it'll be 5 hours before we get to you. Can we call you back? Just leave your phone number, which I did. And sure enough, 5 hours later, they called back. One trick to get through, if you have trouble now or any other time getting through an airline's reservation line in the United States, find their number in another country, South America, Europe, wherever else they fly. You've got to dig around the web for it quite a bit, but there is a website that United has that has all their reservation numbers in about 20 different countries. So if you can get on Skype or you've got cheap cell phone service to call internationally, my tip of the week is find one of those numbers and call them. I did so in one case, and I got through like that. Now, keep in mind, not all foreign reservation agents for all airlines, U.S. airlines, or even airlines in other parts of the world are open 24 hours a day as they are here for American Airlines in America. So keep in mind, call during business hours, and you should get through much, much faster. I saw an interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal I wanted to share with you. On the, you may be familiar with Lonely Planet guides. Most people are. They've been around for decades. They were started by one guy who ran them for years and hired freelance travel writers all around the world to produce guides for the cities and countries. And they're very, very precise guides. They're aimed not just at backpackers, but budget travelers and anybody else who's looking for, the best cafe if you're a student, or, a great hotel at a good price. The founder of Lonely Planet eventually sold them. And I think they were sold again. I may be wrong if it was sold another time, but it occurred to me I had no idea who owned them. And the Wall Street Journal told me, because they ran a piece on a guy who owned an enormous amount of land in California and, in West Texas, not California, West Texas and New Mexico. And he was putting them up for sale. And it happened to mention that he owned Lonely Planet. I've never heard of this guy. His name is Brad Kelly. Ever heard of Brad Kelly? I hadn't. Turns out he owns the entire publishing empire for Lonely Planet. They're doing some television stuff now. They do, of course, books, and then small guidebooks and big books. He made his fortune, Mr. Kelly did, in the discount cigarette business, off-brand cigarettes that cost cheaper than the brands you see advertising on the Super Bowl and so on. He sold it. He sold it 19 years ago to something called Hutchins Industries for $1 billion, even $1 billion. Hutchins, I never heard of them either. Houchens. They're a convenience and grocery store company. So they bought his. So he then went out and bought a whole lot of land in West Texas and New Mexico. He's got on the market, in case you're looking for a little bit of land to stretch out in these times of the coronavirus. He's got about a parcel of Texas ranches that cover 500,000 acres. 500,000 acres. For sale for $400 million. Oh, give or take four. It's $404 million exactly. He's also got a 50,000 acre New Mexico ranch on the market for $96 million. And all of that, if he manages to unload the 500,000 acre one and the 50,000 acre one, he's only sold about half the land he owns. I think he's the eighth largest. Let me see. I wrote down I think he's the eighth largest landowner in the United States, at least until he sells this property. Maybe he was the ninth. Let me see. Nah, didn't have it in my notes. I thought he did. Oh yeah, here it is. Oh well, those 7 Texas ranches he's selling for $404 million. They're equal to, half the size of Rhode Island, half the size of the entire state of Rhode Island. So you can own land half the size of the state of Rhode Island for only $404 million by calling Brad. I had no idea. The question I get a lot on the radio show is, or we get, Robert and Mary and I, is when is the 737 MAX coming back? Now, there's something that they have to worry about, people not wanting to fly right away. That's going to be a problem for Boeing and for the airlines that have it. Norwegian, by the way, has a lot of 737 MAXs parked on the side, and so does American Airlines and United. Delta, amazingly, has none. The dates kept changing of when that aircraft is going to come back into service. It was supposed to be back, last fall, last winter. This spring, it's not coming back this spring. Now it's midsummer. I don't believe that either. But for right now, Boeing is saying mid-2020. Now, I don't know if mid includes July and August or not, but it might. And this is something cool I heard. You might be familiar with W Hotels, sort of yesterday's hip hotels. They got into business with Rent the Runway. Now, some of the women in the audience might know about Rent the Runway. It's a service you subscribe to, outfits, and they send you different outfits to wear that you send back for a subscription fee of $69. I don't know what it is a month, what it is. But W has worked out a deal and has been test marketing it in Aspen, LA, DC, and Miami, where a woman calls goes online a few days ahead of time, and says, look, I'm going to Miami, I need Miami outfits. I'm going to Aspen, I need Aspen outfits. And for $69, the Rent the Runway folks will send that box of clothing to the hotel, and it'll be waiting for the woman who ordered them when she checks in. And at the end of her stay in that destination, she leaves them in her hotel closet, and the hotel sends them back. it's proved so successful for W that they are expanding it to W's in other cities. So watch for that. So if you're one, well, you can carry on. If you don't have to take 4 outfits, you might be able to avoid checking a box. All right. Dan Buettner, as promised, is back. Hi, Dan. Nice to see you.
Hey, Rudy.
in Miami, I believe, where he has recently established a new residence. I've known Dan for a long time. Yeah. It looks like you were right where I am here in St. Paul, Minnesota, Dan, just like that. Palm trees are around, though. Dan started his life as an explorer. He was a biker and using bicycles. And he, among other things, bicycled from Alaska to the tip of South America. He bicycled across the Sahara Desert. Don't ask me how you do that. Ask him. And he also bicycled across all of what was then the Soviet Union. And along the way, in all his travels, he found places where people seemed to be living healthier lives than Americans generally. And they tended to live longer. And term I learned from him, their period of morbidity was shorter. The amount of time they spent being very ill before passing away was much shorter than, for example, Americans. That led to a large company that Dan founded called Blue Zones. He wrote a best-selling book called Blue Zones, the 5 places in the world where people live longer and better than other places. He started a company. He now consults with cities, with buildings, with hospitals, with states on how to blue zone a destination, how to get people to walk more, how to get junk food out of cafeterias, how to get junk food away from the checkout lane at your grocery store. It's nice talking to you, Dan. Nice having you. Thanks very much. We hope to have you on again. Thanks very much. I'm sorry.
Good to be here.
Well, I wanted to get the introduction out of the way because amazingly, I know you don't believe this, but not everybody knows you, and I wanted to tell them a little about you.
No, well done.
So part of the Blue Zones, his book and his ongoing credo in life is how you can live your life more like folks do in the Blue Zone to make it a happier life. He's, by the way, an expert on happiness. Has written a book on that as well. He has a new book out called The Blue Zone Cookbook. Is that the correct title, Dan?
It's Blue Zone Kitchen, 100 recipes to live to 100. National Geographic.
Published by National Geographic, bestseller, New York Times list for weeks until recently.
Number 1 on Wall Street Journal too. But Rudy, I think the two of us share a zeal in travel. I mean, the roots of all this work goes back to really a profound curiosity in the other parts of the world and the sort of wisdom that can be mined by getting out of your own little sort of cocoon, your own little space, and taking a risk and going out into the world and doing so in a methodical and mindful and respectful way. And it's amazing what you can come back with.
Well, I wanted you to bring to the table today some of the precepts or some of the concepts of Blue Zones that you found in your travels that we might be able to bring into our lives in this time of sequestration and lockdown and whatever name you want to use, because many of those 5 Blue Zones you identified are fairly rural, not all of them, but fairly rural. There's a lot of agrarian stuff going on, which people are moving around and exercising, which is something part of the Blue Zone things. So talk to us about lessons from Blue Zones that we can apply to many of our cases, urban lives, or certainly modern American lives.
Yes. So, the idea here was that these are places that live statistically longest, and only about 20% of how long they live is dictated by genes. The other 80% is something else. It could be lifestyle, it could be environment. And remember, we found these Blue Zones in Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Icaria, Greece, Nicoya, Costa Rica, and among the Seventh-day Adventists. And remarkably, the
Seventh-day Adventists in California. Excuse me,
California, yeah, Loma Linda, California. It's mostly among the religion, the Seventh-day Adventists. But remarkably, you see the same sort of trends in places where people live the longest. They tend to have a vocabulary for purpose. They're deeply imbued with a sense of purpose. They don't wake up in the morning untethered and with the existential angst of wondering, what am I doing here? What am I supposed to be doing with my day? They know their ikigai, their sense of purpose, their life meaning, what's important to them, their values. They tend to belong to a faith-based organization. They're surrounded by people who tend to be healthy themselves. Probably the biggest thing that individuals can do for the long run is curate a circle of friends, of people who, one, care about you on a bad day, people who are engaged with the world, people who eat plant-based, whose idea of recreation is playing tennis or bicycling or walking, not just sitting on the couch and watching Doritos. But the idea behind this Blue Zone Kitchen, and I'm getting to the answer to your question here. Probably 2/3 of what explains these people's longevity. And in some of these blue zones, you get 10 times more people reaching a healthy age 100. An extra 10 years of life expectancy. Probably 2/3 of it is what they're eating. And in all these blue zones, the American food culture is coming in like a cancer and just eating away at this way of eating that's worked for hundreds of years. So geographic photographer David McLean and I went back. We armed ourselves with a meta-analysis. So we looked at 150 dietary surveys done over the past century, so we know what these people have been eating for 100 years. And then we went up into these mountain villages and these back alleys, and we found old ladies. It's almost always old women or older women who possess this eating tradition that sometimes goes back to the Middle Ages. And it's changing very rapidly. It's disappearing in a generation, but before it disappeared, photographer David McLean captured the images, and then I went out to capture the recipes. And you find that in places where people are living a long time, they're eating mostly plant-based foods. There are 5 foods on every longevity diet in the world. Whole grains, nuts, greens, tubers, and beans. Very, very much peasant food. But these women know how to make these very simple, and by the way, pantry-friendly foods taste good. I would argue the most important ingredient in any longevity diet is taste. So now, in America right now, on average, we go out to eat about 110 times a year. And every time we go out to eat, we mindlessly consume 200 to 300 more calories than we would if we just ate at home. And the calories that we eat out tend to be laden with fat and sodium and more sugar than at home, where we can control the ingredients. So one of the biggest lessons I think that we can take away in these blue zone at this time of sequestering and being in a quarantine is to learn how to relearn the art of cooking at home. To take, obviously I'm partial to Blue Zone Kitchen, but any cookbook that is mostly plant-based, it's so clear that if you want to live longer, you're minimizing meat, cheese, and eggs and sugar and favoring beans and whole grains and tubers and so forth. But trying 8 or 10 recipes until you find a half a dozen recipes of food you love. Because if you love it, you'll eat it. You'll eat it for the long run because you've made it. You have the skill to actually produce it, and you start to create this sort of rebooting of the American diet. And so that was a very long-winded way of saying try cooking some new dishes while in quarantine.
Well, I also like staying in touch and having a circle of friends, which of course can be difficult if you're quarantined. But just last night, some of my friends and your friends,
yes,
I think you were invited to come in on a Zoom chat. I've never done that. I've never used Zoom. It's a piece of software,
it's like this one.
It's like this one, yeah. Except you can have 5, 6, 7. I don't know how many people. We had, I think, 5 last night. 5 different people on the screen. These are all friends who live in different places, but we all know each other. I think Dan was invited, but he's in Miami, so he's out there surfing all the time. I think whatever you do, I think. But it was really fun. We're going to spend an hour. We went on an hour and a half. We could have gone on 2 or 3 hours, and we were staying in touch. It's not is it as good as sharing a glass of wine in someone's living room or on someone's front porch or front yard, backyard? No. But we saw each other. We talked in real time. We saw each other. We talked, and it was a sense of community that Dan was referring to as one of the precepts of Blue Zones.
So, and I know this group of people, and I know they're everybody's dear friends of each other. The litmus test of a meaningful social interaction is, do these people care about each other on a bad day? That's the question the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation uses to determine loneliness. Do you have 3 friends you can count on a bad day? So whether it's electronic or it's face-to-face, I would argue that doing a Zoom chat with 4 or 5 people who really care about you, who will loan you money, or who will call you when your chips are down or just been fired or feeling blue, I would argue that's more valuable than standing around face-to-face with a bunch of people who are talking celebrity or sports and really don't care about you. So,
and as you know, one of the participants last night, her grandmother passed away last night.
Today, right? Yeah. And so the fact that you guys were rallying around her.
Yeah, we've talked today, she and I already. So, yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You're right. I mean, there are times when you need to talk to people, and it's difficult to do if you're not supposed to leave your home. And this is one way to do it. Let me go ahead. We have a couple of questions, a lot of questions for you, actually. Let me scroll down here. Chadburn asks, hey, Dan, in the future world of social distancing, what kind of effect will it have on that part of longevity we're talking about, that social part?
Before this whole coronavirus snafu, I would have argued that technology is a cheap imitation for the real thing. But this sort of forced slowdown. I work with 51 cities, and actually the city pretty much turns over their population health to my team. People are increasingly lonely, increasingly implode into their phones, and they're also in such a hurry. People don't have time to cook. It takes a month to find a time when people can get together. And this period of being forced to slow down, I think, has opened up an opportunity for us to connect online in a much higher quality way than we have in the past. It's not just transactional. People are connecting to connect at this time, and it may be a silver lining to the whole catastrophe of the pandemic.
It's funny you should say that. I mean, my daughter, I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. My daughter lives in London and is now in a home in France they have. And I sometimes go 2 weeks without talking to her. Maybe we'll talk most frequently once a week, unless there's something we need to talk about. And I have 2 little granddaughters, 9 and 11, Emily and Eliza, and we talk even less frequently. But in the last couple of weeks, I think I'm on day 10 or 11 of my quarantine here. I've talked to my granddaughter almost every day, Eliza and Emily, and I've talked to my daughter almost every day, which is strange because I wasn't doing that before. And I'm doing it on, I call it the picture phone on WhatsApp. I know it's not a picture phone, but I like that old-fashioned term. And it's great to be able to see them and talk to them. So in a way, I'd say to Chad, who asked you the question, Chadburn, that there are some benefits to this. I'm talking more to my loved ones than I ever did. And they live far away.
I think there's less competition for our attention, and we get a better fix on what really matters to us, which tends to be family. I get to every night, my mom and dad are sequesters up in the Twin Cities. My brothers are all over the place. We all come together from 8 to 8:30 my time, or 7 to 7:30 their time. And we spend a half hour. We're eating, we're doing whatever, having a cocktail, but nevertheless, we're connecting. And I think in a weird sort of way, people may find a truer connection through this period than they knew face to face.
Good news for Chadburn. I just want to say, this is not a question, but Christina writes in, amen, not enough being said about food and its relationship with health in the news, always focused on pharmaceuticals. You can deal with that in just a minute, but I also have a question here from Christina saying, do you believe this will awaken people enough to bring about positive, much needed changes in lifestyles? And Ginger asks, is this like stepping back in time when neighbors were friends as well? There's a thought. I think so. Yeah, I'd say yes to Ginger.
Yeah, but I live in a building where we have balconies, so I actually met my balcony mate. So something I might not have done.
You hear stories of people going in their building to older folks saying, "Look, I know it's dangerous for you to go out, or you can't go grocery shopping for whatever reason. we're going to the groceries. Grocery store? Can we get you anything? People who've never talked to them, to other people in their building before.
We live in a time with there's this sort of relentless pursuit of comfort and ease, and we somehow think that's this sort of endless. The more comfort, the more easier life gets us, the better it is. But a lot of these quality interactions come in times of hardship. I remember it snowed 4 feet in Minnesota one Halloween several years ago. I never met any of my neighbors until all of a sudden we had to dig ourselves out to get to the grocery store. And we actually ran out of food for a couple of days. So neighbors had to go knock on each other's door. In a weird counterintuitive way, I think the hardships are often blessings in the rearview mirror. And I think this period will be one too. And by the way, people in blue zones, they lived hard lives. They lived great periods of famine. The fact that they had such tight families and tight, cohesive communities is because they had to lock arms and connect to survive. Blue zones aren't spas. They're not spas at the Four Seasons. They're places where, people walk and they grow their own food and they don't have air conditioning. So there's some good lessons to be learned now, I believe.
How do you find when you travel all the time? I know because you do a lot of speechifying and working on Blue Zone projects. How do you find if you go to a city you've not been in and maybe don't know anybody in to ask immediately upon arrival, how do you find restaurants that serve healthy food?
Well, there's I eat mostly plant-based. There's an app called Happy Cow, which keeps track of all the vegetarian restaurants in America, and I have a good network of my partner's vegan, Kathy Freston, and between the two of us, we know somebody in the town, and very quickly, I'm in Miami here. I've quickly become friends with 2 vegan restaurant owners, so I got to hook up immediately.
That's great. But how did you find those 2? By looking online?
No, through friends of friends, through Rich Roll, who was another podcaster who found out I lived in Miami and said you two should meet. And then once I met them, they knew all the other. The people who are really committed to eating plant-based food, they tends to be a community. They tend to know each other, and it's you can very quickly find out. And in any big cities, there tends to be only a handful of really great upscale plant-based restaurants. And once you find one that you like, they know all the other ones as well.
Right. Luann says we refer to this time as a relaxing extended Sabbath, and she thanks you for being you. Christina asks, how is this affecting? I'm sorry, go ahead.
That was easy. I tried being everybody else, and it was a miserable failure. And by the way, I know Luann. Hi, Luann from Iowa.
Christina is asking, how is this this time of our virus? How is this affecting the blue zones? The same or not as much? I guess she's asking about the specific 5 places or places that are practicing blue zones concepts.
Yeah, I've actually emailed around a little bit to the blue zone. In the Nicoya blue zone, there's only been 2 cases. So one of the advantages of the blue zones, they tend to be remote, and that's protected them from infectious diseases, which we're suffering from now. It's also protected them from chronic disease, which is largely the result of the standard American diet reaching them. In Sardinia, they got hit pretty hard. Because all those cases in northern Italy, a lot of people fled northern Italy to what they thought would be a safer refuge in Sardinia. And there's a lot of really old people, and they're completely locked in, quarantined, many cases not taking visitors. I heard from a friend in Loma Linda, California, the Adventist Blue Zone, and they're handling it really well. They have virtual church. They exchange recipes. They do meal delivery for older people. It's one of these great examples of a religion that sort of an old time religion where people look out for each other, and that's the case. And then I think in general, people who have a strong sense of faith are better able to weather the stress from a situation like this.
Do you feel? I mean, I don't get stressed out easily. I think I'm not stressed, but I might be. I mean, do you think more of us those of us who think we're sort of cool, calm, and collected are more stressed than we know we are?
No.
Okay.
No. I think people are getting better rest right now. You may be replacing some of the stress of everyday life, which we tend to discount because we're so busy. But everybody's got bills to pay. You're rushing off to work. You're sitting in traffic. We have deadlines. Those are all pressed on hold right now. And of course, will our parents get the coronavirus? Is the market going to continue to crash? When will I be able to go out again? But I don't believe the aggregate level is any greater. In fact, I would argue stress is lower right now.
All right, before I say goodbye to you, let's check on the market here. I'll go on my phone to the magic market checker thing and see how it's doing since you brought it up. Up 1,000, Dow's up 1,318 points. So
what were we worried about, for crying out loud?
Exactly. Well, Dan Buettner, please give me the exact title of your cookbook because I don't have it in front of me again.
The Blue Zone's Kitchen, 100 recipes to live to 100, and it's like a National Geographic article combined with a cookbook. So it's it looks nice on your living room table as well.
It does. It's got a beautiful cover and beautiful photographs inside. In fact, if you go to just Amazon.com and type in Blue Zones or Dan Buettner, Buettner, a collection of his books will come up, including his one on happiness and his original bestseller, The Blue Zones, those 5 places in the world where people live longer and healthier than most of us. It's fascinating reading. And if you tuned in early, you found out how Dan learned this just by traveling around the world. He was curious as to why people who didn't seem to have gold American Express cards and central air conditioning seem to be living quite happily, perhaps even more happier than than him or some of his friends. That's led him to begin looking into that. Dan Buettner, you can find more information at bluezones.com. Dan, thank you so much for joining us on this very first webcast. We're going to perfect this and make it better each week.
I can't imagine it being any better than right now, actually. But
you're going to like Dan. Next week, we're having a guy on who wrote a book a year ago that I was fascinated by about waiting. Now, that sounds like watching paint dry, right? Who wants to talk about waiting? But think about how much travelers wait in line for tickets, for hotel rooms to get ready, for taxis to show up. And he brings a really interesting thoughts to waiting. I mean, for example, at Disney, I didn't know this, at Disney parks, they'll often put at the beginning of a long line for a ride, the wait time. It might say 90 minutes, but they always way overestimate it. So when you get there in 60 minutes, you're happy because you beat the 90 minutes. So waiting is how people use waiting. And join us next week. He's a fascinating guy. He teaches at the University of Maryland media studies, and I've talked to him about it. And he just has great stories about waiting through history. I mean, think of how, waiting for smoke signals to get across the valley. And now we get impatient. He said, one more thing. He says for every 10th of a second, someone has to wait on Amazon for a page to come up. The company loses 1% of its of the money it could have made. 10th of a second.
I don't know if you ever read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse.
Yeah, in college, yeah.
Yes, but it's essentially the Buddha, and he applied. He'd been walking around naked with a bowl for years as a Brahmin, and he falls in love with a woman. The woman says, "You need to make money," and he says, "Well, I'll go find a job." So he goes to a merchant, and the merchant sees him and standing there naked and dusty, says, "Why should I hire you?" And Siddhartha says, "Because I can think, I can fast, and I can wait." And he got hired, and he did fabulously well. And I think there's something to this idea of our capacity to wait. So,
well, join us next week with Jason Farman, who wrote a book on waiting and is really an interesting conversationalist on it. And thank you for joining us, Dan Buettner, today. Thank you.
We say this, but I can't wait.
See you guys. Thank you, and thank you to all of you who joined on the inaugural broadcast. Please subscribe to us. We're going to come back next week. We have a different technology. I know our first guest reverberated a little. I hope we take care of that. But thanks for joining us today, and let's do it all again and meet again this time next week. Bye-bye.
Great to see you guys. Thanks, Rudy. See you at Happy Hour.
It's a date.